7:31, and I want to thank you all for being on time tonight. We have a very exciting conversation ahead of us, and I want to be really mindful of our time so we can make the most of it together. So thank you again for joining us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Erica Abrams, and I am the manager of an advisor and parent experiences here at BBYO. Part of my roles and responsibilities are to put together these amazing calls for you as parents to learn about how you can support us and we can support you in our parent and teen experiences. So we're really excited to have you tonight for our from graduation to greatness conversation, and have this important conversation on what it will be like to prepare your teen for life after high school. We know that can be exciting and daunting, and our friends here are here to help you. So I'm excited to introduce Lee Sosin, a co-founder of GapWell, who is focused on student success, and he is here to moderate tonight's conversation. Before I kick it off to him, I want to remind you that we want to keep you all involved in the conversation. If you have any questions throughout tonight's call, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom, and we will be checking that throughout the call to make sure as many of your questions as possible get answered. So I'm going to take myself off mute now and pass it over to Lee.
Great. Thank you, Erica, and welcome everybody. This is really exciting for us. BBYO is an organization that is near and dear to our heart, and I'm going to take 1 second to introduce myself and then introduce our distinguished panelists for this evening. So my name is Lee Sosin, and as Erica mentioned, I'm a co-founder of GapWell. GapWell is a company which you'll hear more about throughout the evening, but we are 100% focused on student success, not just on their transition from high school to college, but also college to career. And I am very proud to be joined by my co-founder, Seth Kessler, who also has the distinct honor of being a former very important person in the CVR region of BBYO, and which I'm sure he will brag about later. But it's an organization that, like I said, that's near and dear to our heart, and there's nothing that we enjoy more than giving back to the Jewish community and to BBYO. And among the distinguished graduates of BBYO and alumni is Dr. Amy Silverman, and I would like to just introduce her to you. Amy is a Harvard and Cornell trained, board certified child and adolescent psychiatrist. She works in private practice here in Westchester County, New York. Her dance card is completely full. She's highly sought after, and we are very fortunate to have her with us tonight to share her experience and her knowledge, one that has come from years of helping families navigate this very transition. So welcome, Seth, and welcome, Amy, Dr. Silverman.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we want to make sure that we spend as much time as possible focused on the topic, which is how do we help our children be successful to thrive as they transition from high school to college. And before we do that, we thought we'd just do a quick little icebreaker. And if you guys could look at the chat and go into the chat, we're going to talk a lot about student success. But what is that? What does success mean? What is success? What is the success that we hope for our children? So why don't you go in the chat right now and let's see what ideas people have around this, how they would define success for their children, their college-bound children. Self-reliant with marketable skills. It's great. Happy and healthy. Happy and self-sufficient. Adulting. Feel ready to leave home, which is a great one. Feeling accomplished. Thank you all for putting these in. Building their own community. That's a great one. Thank you, Sonia. Emotionally intelligent. Happy in what they're going to do later in life. Growing as a person. This is wonderful. Lots of adventures, finding their passion, starting on the path towards that goal. That's great. Thank you all for sharing those. I'll share one, and then I'm going to ask Seth to share his point of view. You know, for us, we think a lot about our children's success, and one of the best definitions that I've come across is that success, and this I think applies to all of us, not just when you're at the beginning of your journey, but success is having a career that affords you the ability to live a life consistent with your highest values, which that always spoke to me, and I think that that's a wonderful ambition we should have for our children and for ourselves. And I want to just ask Seth to just kick off the conversation. You know, Seth, we're focused here on this conversation, in this webinar on the first year of college, right? That very critical freshman year. How do you think about success for freshmen?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for moderating this panel. This is a treat. When we talk about success at GapWell, when we're talking about college-bound high school seniors, we focus on the 3 C's: confident, comfortable, and capable. And when I looked at all the answers that people were posting in the chat, there is no right answer to this, but it's really about what do we do to set people up for success? And the way we're thinking about it is all the things that you listed, and at the end of the day, we want them to thrive. So that's how we think about it when we're talking to your sons and daughters that are heading off to college: confident, comfortable, capable.
Awesome. And yet somehow that feels, for a lot of us who work with young people, that goal of confident, comfortable, capable feels a little bit out of reach. Why is it so hard? Why does it feel that way?
So when we started GapWell, we had a number of theories. We're both parents of young adults, both in high school, college, and we went out there to validate some of our assumptions. So we surveyed over 1,000 college students reflecting on their first year college experience. And it was 1,000 students and their families across about 100 different college campuses. And what we found out is that 82% reported experiencing a lot of stress. So across 1,000 plus, 82% are stressed out. 32% were saying that they had the confidence when they arrived at college to be successful, which is obviously a pretty small number. 40% said they were ready to navigate socially when they first got to college. And 75%, so 3 out of 4 students in that 1,000 plus person survey said that they wanted more help their first year. So end of the day, we heard a student recently say to us, college is hard. It's a tough experience. And so, you know, a lot of the feedback that we learned through that survey informed what we built that you'll hear about later. But it's not exactly a warm, fuzzy picture of they get thrown over the fence into college and they immediately thrive as adults.
Dr. Silverman, Amy, so only a third of students, less than a third, feel confident and able to navigate socially. Why are these numbers so shocking? Or maybe it's not shocking to you because you're working with families day in and day out. Is it that young people are different, or is it that college is different now? Or is it a combination of both?
So, I mean, these numbers make me sad, actually. And it's, you know, it's interesting because obviously I see kids who are struggling or have some anxiety or have some challenges. Often that's why they make their way to my office. But the piece that I think is so compelling here is that these are kids across all sort of, you know, across 100 different universities who are not from a clinical population, and more than 80% of them are stressed. And so I think that says something about the world we're living in right now. I think it's both, to answer your question. I think college is different than when we went. I think there have been changes in the way we socialize, the way we communicate, the way we access information. And I think that, as your data suggests, it's a tough transition for these kids. And so I think because the world has changed, I think that our kids need to develop different skills in order to be able to navigate that world. And I think that's part of what has made this transition more challenging. And these were difficult skills to attain even prior to this pandemic, but then we had all these disruptions during the pandemic that made them even harder to attain. And so what are some of those skills that I'm seeing that kids need to work on a little bit more? I mean, the good news piece is that these are skills they can develop. There are skills that they absolutely can learn. But I think the biggest piece is the executive functioning. And everybody talks about executive functioning. I'm not sure we always know what it means. But executive functioning is basically like the secretary secretary of the brain. Or one of the Harvard researchers called it the air traffic controller. So you think about the fact that the secretary sets up all the planning and all the schedule and everything else, and the boss can do the job and go to the meetings. Or the planes are all coming in and we have to figure out how to make sure that only one plane lands on each runway at the same time. Obviously a really important job for that part of the brain. And so there's skills that help you with planning, managing time, organizing, breaking down tasks, and having cognitive flexibility. And cognitive flexibility is one of the most important because that is when, your situations change around you and you have to adapt the way you think or the way that you approach something because of the way the situation is changing. And I think that's the most important piece of executive functioning when it comes to solving problems. And that's one of the other key tasks that I think our kids need to be really working on and honing to be able to manage this transition. Others are things like daily living skills, doing their laundry, making sure they have time to go to the dining hall, sleeping enough. And the social connectedness piece, the way we connect is different, and how we interact, and some of those social skills are important as well.
I just want to, just for everybody, so I didn't do this at the beginning, I should have, is just sort of explain to you what to expect. So we're going to have a conversation here about sort of, as Amy started, like what's going on with kids today and what is the first year experience and how is it different? Then we're going to talk about what you specifically, because this is supposed to be helpful to you. So we're going to talk specifically for you as parents of college-bound students, what can you be doing this summer, right, before your kid leaves the nest to help them develop some skills that are going to serve them well in college. Then we're going to talk about what you can do once they're on campus and what you should not do once they're on campus. So we're going to have that conversation, and then we're going to end with some Q&A. So as Erica mentioned in the beginning, if you are thinking of questions, you can drop them in the chat at any time. We're going to save them to the end, but we want you to be thinking about questions all along the way. But this is really supposed to be designed to be a conversation that is filled with great takeaways for you guys. So that's going to be the structure. We're going to talk a little bit, then what you can do with your kid before, during the summer, then when they're on campus, and we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So hopefully that'll get everybody thinking about those great questions. So, okay, we talked a little bit about skills that may be lacking or that maybe our kids didn't develop. And I know there's a lot of reasons why maybe our kids, and I say ours because I have, one child who just graduated college and two who are in college right now. So I'm in it. That they're not showing up as capable as we did. But I think also my experience has been that college is different, right? It's far easier to be lonely on campus today than it ever was for us. What else is different about the first year experience? And I'll open it up to both Seth and Amy for this.
So I think from the GapWell perspective, we realized pretty early on that what we experienced in college is really not relevant to the experience that our BBYO sons and daughters are having right today. And so rather than talk about what it was like 30 years ago, what it was like for us, our teens don't want to hear that. What they really want to hear about is how to make the most of the experience. And Amy, you've talked about this a lot of late. The professional point of view as an expert in this field, I mean, you know exactly what they're experiencing. And it's not just some kids, it's really all of them. And maybe you could touch on some of the themes that we were discussing even before the call that I think are pretty relevant to this discussion.
So I think that, kids are lonelier and less connected. And I think that's one of the things that's made college more of a difficult transition. And, one of the things I think about, because I hear about all the ways that they socialize and the way that they connect. And, I remember things like sitting in the lounge and watching, must-see TV or whatever. And what I hear from my patients is that they're in their rooms watching TV on their laptop on Netflix, and that part seems very different to me. And I think about, the first, I had to look this up, but the first iPhone came out in 2007. And I think that that really profoundly changed the way that kids connect to each other. And one of the things I know a lot of colleges are really trying hard to do is to really improve the offerings of in-person, on-campus connection opportunities, because we don't want kids sitting in their rooms with their doors closed in a way that they're not going to be able to connect with who else is on their hall.
Yeah, without a doubt. All right, so enough about the problem. Let's start talking about solutions, because I do think that that is, really what a lot of us are looking for as our kids are beginning on this journey. And I think a lot of people who are on this call, it may be their older kid or their only kid who is about to take this step versus, once you've been through it, you feel a little bit more comfortable and you really understand how college has changed, and it has dramatically since we were all there. So let's, as I said before, we want to kind of break it into two sections. The first is focused on, look, your kid hasn't left for college yet, right? Our teens are there, they're in the house. We've got from now until August. What should we be doing to help them develop the skills that they need and think about things in a different way and get maybe ready beyond just buying the microwave and ordering their bedding? And Amy, feel free to jump in.
Okay, so I'm going to start with something that dovetails a little bit with what we said before, which is that over the summer, I think one of the most important, or starting now, one of the most important things we can do is, as parents, we can talk about, we can change the way we talk about the transition and the expectations for college. I think it's not helpful when we say, this is going to be, no doubt, the best 4 years of your life. It was the best 4 years of my life. I think when we do that, we set them up to feel the expectation and the pressure that this is what should be happening. And they get there, and it takes time to find your people, to make your connections, to figure out how to manage the level of the work and all of that. And so I think that if we can change the way we talk about this, then we actually shift a little bit the way that they experience it. And I will say that, we probably have a bit of a recall bias, because it wasn't like it was perfect for all of us either. But, we filter out all the negatives. That's what our brains do. But I think if we say something to our kids like, we're so excited for you, you're going to a great school, and we think it's going to be phenomenal, but, know that it takes time to find your people. And it may be an adjustment in terms of getting comfortable with the workload. And you're going to have good days and bad days, just so we're not saying to them, like, you're supposed to feel good all the time. I think that makes a huge difference.
I totally agree. And I, Amy, when we were talking earlier today and you were sharing some of the thoughts and insights that you're sharing tonight, everything that you said aligned with what we're hearing from older students when they reflect on their first year experience. And I think when we talk about, as Lee was saying, about what you do before, the summer before your son or daughter goes off to college, and then what you can do while they're in college, like this preparation and conversation, Amy, that you're referencing happens now. Like, you don't wait until the week before. You don't put it off because, it's not convenient to talk about. It's not fun to talk about. Like, having the conversation now, validating that, like you said, it's not the best 4 years of your life. Some days are incredible and some days could be better, right? And if you normalize that idea, when your teen has not the greatest day, and it could be for any number of reasons, because as I said earlier, college is tough, right? It's tough to make friends. It's, you think you're going to do great academically, and then suddenly you don't, which is totally normal. Or you rush a sorority, or you don't get your first choice. That doesn't feel great. And so all the things that we know are part of life, but in the moment are going to feel really, really difficult. When you start having the conversations now, it doesn't surprise them, right? Because they've heard it from their parents, they're hearing it from their friends, and particularly if they hear it from older students who can say, hey, I was also a freshman at that school 3 years ago. Here's what it was like for me. Here's what I remember. So the more that we can start that conversation, it'll just help with the transition.
Right. And I know, Seth, you guys are going to talk more about GapWell later, but a lot of the model is with being able to hear from older students about that experience, which I think is a really unique opportunity. So we also, a really important thing we can do when they're home with us still before they go off to college is to really encourage more independence and responsibility while they're home and we have some oversight and we still have some leverage. And so we can let them problem solve. We can, when something comes up, we don't have to weigh in right away. We can let them try to figure out how to navigate it. We can have them starting to make their doctor's appointments, manage their patient portals, go to the pharmacy and know that they have to bring their insurance card and figure out how to get refills themselves. Things that we may do for them pretty automatically, but they're really good life skill tasks for them to learn. We can have them start doing their laundry, and just kind of figuring out that that's also a multi-step task that requires a lot of executive functioning. And so we can start to give them more and more kind of independent responsibility while we help them figure out how to do that.
100%. And one of the topics that we hear a lot about is, and this is something that trips up a lot of college freshmen, it's managing their time. We all assume, because none of us would even have shown up tonight if we didn't have this in our calendar with a link, with a reminder, like, I can't get through my day without my calendar. But, Lee and I experienced this firsthand. We first launched the GapWell Guide and we were in a classroom giving advice. And I remember that moment when we asked, the 41 students in the room, who here uses a calendar? And this is 2 weeks, 3 weeks into their first year college experience. And, 40% of the room raised their hand and said they use a calendar. And, we're in disbelief because we're like, how did you even know to show up here? Because you're coming from a high school environment where you go to school every day at 7:45, you come home every day at 2:20, your schedule's always the same. So managing time is something that is really, really important. And it's something that you can start now. It's totally new to them to have a flexible schedule, right? Imagine you went from same schedule every day and now you have a class at 8 a.m. and you don't have another class till 4 p.m. Well, how are you going to use that middle of the day? Well, some kids are able to figure it out and some not so much. So, focusing on how you use your time wisely, how you get more done. And one of the topics that we talk about a lot in our business is like, have some guilt-free fun, right? Get your work done so you can go out with your friends and have a good time. Get your work done so you can go enjoy yourself and not feel guilty because you really didn't finish what you set out to do. And so, getting the calendar set up, setting up recurring meetings, syncing up with your phone, like these are basic skills, but they need these in college. And it's shocking how few young adults have that already figured out before they get to college.
I want to hear more about this, but I just want to bring up one point, which is that the thing that Seth just mentioned, which is that, one of the ways to prevent sort of lecturing your kid is to also make sure that they understand that these skills are about unlocking the version of college that they actually want, right? Where they're having more fun and it's guilt-free fun because they've gotten their work done. They feel when they're out, they don't have this nagging thing of, oh my God, I gotta write that paper, but they're actually able to have the experience they want. But the way to get there is by being organized and like getting things done. And so it's a lot of what we also work on with our coaching clients, but it really is, the one thing that we've seen more than anything else is learning how to manage your time just unlocks a less stressful, more fun college experience.
And on top of that, the reason we launched the College Crash Course, which is basically the summer piece of what we do, is because it's not a lot of topics, but they're really important topics. And while it's not fun to do this stuff, it's really important for your son or daughter's success. So we really focus on what do they need to know before they get there, which will serve them well immediately and long-term, not just in college, but in life.
So Amy,
And these don't always come naturally to people. So I think that's the other piece. The one other piece I wanted to mention of what you can do over this summer before, because I know we have to move on to what you do when they're on campus, but I think that conversations that we have with our kids over the summer are really important. And so we need to be having conversations about how we're going to manage tasks and how we're going to manage communication and various different things once they go to school. We don't want to wait till the week before they're going to school to have these conversations. And so some of the things I think about us talking about are, how are we going to communicate and how often are we communicating? How are we going to manage money? Because that's a really important issue that comes up. what are our family priorities and values? And how are we going to make sure that what you're doing when you're away is kind of at least somewhat consistent with what we think is important? Like, we do, we want you to have a really good time, but like, we are paying for you to go to class, and we want you to make good decisions and to be safe and all of those types of things. And then the most important conversation perhaps is how you tell us that you need help when you are struggling with something. Because one of the things I find is that a lot of times it is an absolute catastrophe crisis by the time some kid tells us that we need some help. And it doesn't have to be that way. And we can actually step in and help or help them to problem solve much more easily if we know earlier on. But, every college has their version of the plague where kids get sick, and whatever. And, they're sick for 2 days, they miss a couple classes, all of a sudden they're behind, they're overwhelmed, and now they think they're going to fail chemistry. And so, that's a pretty universal experience. And so anticipating that with our kids and telling them that we want them to talk to us about those things before it's at a point where you can't make up that class, we can then really help them. And so I think those are really important conversations to have.
So maybe on that note, let me throw into the conversation, when we first were putting together the agenda, and given how many questions were sent in advance of this webinar, we were like, there's no way we can cover everything in an hour, but we want to touch on as many topics that are relevant to this audience as possible. So one of the things we did, and we're going to drop it in the chat, is we put together, and Amy, you played a big role in helping us pull this together, is the 10 conversations that we recommend you have with your son or daughter before they go to college. And we put this together just so that you don't forget, just so that you don't push it off. And it's a simple list. It's a great reference. And again, there's a lot to cover, but what we don't want to see happen is, oh, well, I meant to have that conversation, but I never got around to it. And so I believe it's in the chat. All right, so it's already in the chat. So go ahead, you can download that. And just use that as a reference. Before your teen leaves the home and goes off to college, make sure you've talked about these topics. Because Amy, like you said, if you think you're going to talk to them every day and your teen is like once a week is cool, that's not a recipe for success. So a lot of the things that we're talking about is what we don't want to have happen. And I've had this conversation with actually some BBYO families, is folks that go off to college and don't thrive. And then when you ask the teens, well, what happened? Well, I hadn't really thought about it. Right? Like, it may not be a super exciting conversation to have, but it's really important. And so you don't want them to show up and be like, well, now I'm thinking about it, and this is not an environment where I feel like I can have the conversation with people I don't know, or whatever the case might be. So take advantage of that. Amy, thank you for helping us pull that together, so that even when we have a short period of time here, we're covering a lot of ground here.
So just building on what Seth said, if you click on that link that's in the chat, it'll bring you to a landing page. All you have to do is, put in your name and your email, hit submit. It'll give you the opportunity to download it immediately, and you'll also get an email to your inbox with a link in case you're having any issues downloading it immediately. But in addition to the topics of conversations, we also had Amy put together her advice on how to have a better conversation with your teen, which is, very valuable. To help you get the most and help them get the most out of those conversations. And while we're just waiting for folks to do that, give them the opportunity, I just wanted to, I had two thoughts while you guys were speaking of other things that you can do this summer to help your teen have a better first year. One thing, we talked a little bit about managing money. So if you give your child weekly allowance, use the summer as a way to teach them how to manage their money, and either switch it to monthly or literally give them a lump sum at the beginning of the summer and let them learn. Better for them to learn that mistake right now of blowing their money early than when they go off to college. So I think that's a great thing to do to start developing those skills. And the second thing I was going to mention, just because we were talking a lot about, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but we were talking about loneliness and how it's much harder for first years to make friends, just in general in our environment, with all all the doors in your dorm room or you know, in your dorm are closed and nobody's socializing as much as they were doing in person. Talk to them about the clubs that they need to join, not just the classes that they're going to choose, right? Get them into thinking about clubs. And when you do that, and this, I actually got this from one of our GapWell Guide contributors, they should have clubs that are, if they have clubs that they want to join that are exclusive, such as making it onto a team, or being part of a play or something where there's cuts, they need to also be thinking about clubs that'll just welcome everybody, because it is a not a fun experience if you are the captain of the debate team in high school and you can't make the debate team in college, and that was what you had your heart set on as your thing. So they need to join clubs that are welcoming to everybody, not just the ones that have cuts and are exclusionary. Okay, so hopefully everybody's had a chance to download that great guide that Dr. Silverman put together. And now we are going to pivot from the summer to the fall and to the entire first year, which is, you know, an area of focus for, I think, all of us, because that's where you have a little less control, maybe a lot less control over what's going on, and the phone rings and the texts start coming and all the rest. So I'm going to push it over to Amy to talk from her point of view. Before we get into the solutions, why don't you talk a little bit about what are the most common things you see during that first year as a psychiatrist that's working with teens and families?
Okay, so when you asked me to do this, I actually looked at all the things, all the topics that that have come up for me, like let's say over the past 4 or 5 years, when people are going off to college and they're in their first year, and what families are describing, and that it was the same things over and over again. I mean, one big one is concerns about belonging, finding their people, connecting socially, and they would look around at the social media and whatever and feel like everybody has friends or a group before they do, and that's something that I think a lot of people feel anxious about. The academic demands certainly are another one, that often they'll feel overwhelmed either by the demands themselves, the level being different than what they were used to. I think the schedule, as we mentioned before, just like managing their schedule. You know, they have this flexibility with all these breaks in their day, and yet they can't figure out how to get to the dining hall and how to make sure they can sleep enough. Incidentally, less than 25% of our college-age students report sleeping adequately. So, I mean, that's 3/4 or more do not sleep well enough. They have a hard time waking up and they can't plan their time. Difficulty getting along with roommates, or just, you know, issues around living with somebody else in a small space all the time. Feeling lost as to what to get involved in or to join, what to do if you don't get accepted to that sorority or fraternity or whatever. And then the anxiety about, like, did I make the right decision? Is this the right fit for me? Do I have enough friends? Is this the right place? Am I happy? Did I make a mistake? Many of those kids who ask that end up being very happy, staying where they are. But I think there's always that process of, like, is this the right place for me?
Yeah, it's incredible. Actually, so much of what you just said are things that we've published through the GapWell Guide. So Seth, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about GapWell and our student contributors and what they're talking about. But you know, there's been more than 150 videos that have gone out to first years from GapWell during the academic year. What are you seeing? How does that match up with what Amy was just talking about?
So when Amy was first giving us her recommendations of what she thought we should cover tonight, so many of the topics were the same topics that our student contributors are giving advice about. And it was interesting because we started to talk about like the editorial calendar, because that's effectively what it is that we're talking about here, which is, you know, what topics do people care about and when? And I'm sure even if we were to open up the entire group here and ask everyone, like, what topics you think matter in August versus September, like, you can almost guess it. And so in the early days of the GapWell Guide, we actually sat a bunch of students down, both first-year students, older students, and we asked them what matters when. And they essentially built effectively an editorial calendar. And you can guess. In August, they were talking about living on their own, making friends, dealing with roommates, how to make decisions, fear of missing out. You know, it was all about adjusting to their new environment. And it's a big adjustment. And then when you start to get to, for example, Amy, you know this from your own work, like you get to Thanksgiving and now they're stressed out because they have to come home and see their family and they've been on their own and now they're being told what to do and they're about to go back for exams and now they're home for another month. And it's like, so you look at the calendar, the stuff that they're talking about in August, September doesn't mirror what they're talking about when they come back from winter break. Now they're talking about, oh, I'm not sure if this is my right major. Oh, what am I going to do this summer? Oh, who am I going to live with next year? So the entire experience, and I had said to Lee, I'm like, oh, I'll just pull a couple examples from our, 150 short form videos, which is the content that we'll talk about in a moment. And what I realized is that when I looked at the topics that the older students were advising on throughout the year, there's so many good topics. And, it was almost impossible to pull like my 5 or 6 favorites. So I looked at academics and I'm just pulling some headlines here, but like, help, I don't know what my career should be. Midterms didn't go well. Here's how to bounce back. Sit next to someone in class, which again, some of these topics, I'm like, that's a great topic. And sometimes I'm like, where do they come up with these things? And then I looked at health and wellness, which is a big topic. Amy, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you. I'm feeling a little sad. Is that normal? How am I supposed to get work done when the weather is great? It's dark at 5:30 p.m. How to handle the seasonal blues. That was someone from California who was in Ithaca, New York. How often do you wash your sheets? That was a personal favorite of mine, which again, a lot of people were like, that's a great topic. How to avoid toxic comparison. Social media, you probably heard of it. One woman said, seriously, get more sleep. And I'm like, finally, a topic I can relate to. And then she proceeded to talk about how going to sleep early for her was 1:30 a.m. But anyways, I think in the end, there's so much good advice out there. And it's coming from the people who are living it right now. And their version of college from the last couple of years mirrors the first year experience that our sons and daughters were about to enter.
Okay. I want to be cognizant of time. I want to get to Q&A, but Amy, before we do that, we promise, like we talked about summer, now the kids are at college. What are the things a parent can do and should do to support their kids in the right way? Because obviously our goal is we want our kids to be self-sufficient. That was in that our initial conversation about success. So many people said, I want them to be self-sufficient. I want them to learn how to adult. I want them to. So how do we do it in the right way? How do we support them in the right way so they're still growing while we're supporting them?
Right. So I think I could do an entire 3-hour talk on this, but I'm going to try to boil it down to like 5 minutes or less than that. I think the first thing is the same thing that we said when they were home, but now they're away, is the encouraging independence and problem solving. I think that is one of the most important tasks of your kids at this stage. And believe me, we all, I also have a college age daughter and we're all grappling with how to do this. It's not the easiest of tasks, but we want to make sure we don't swoop in and save the day. Our kids ask us for help and we text back right away with all the things they could do. They have 25 ways to access all this information right away. And we actually need to take a step back and to give them space to figure out the answers. Ask them what they think. Don't text back right away. They end up making a decision. They figure out what to do. There's like a natural consequence to not being right, immediately available. We may not love what they decide to do, but at least they make some decision. And I would say, if it's a crisis, that's different, then we need to intervene. But unless it's a crisis, we should be supportive and listen and be available, but don't rush in to decide for them. Remember that when we think about problem solving, we have to define the problem first. And then we have to figure out what are all the possible solutions and what are the good and the bad aspects of each solution. And then we can make a decision. We are not encouraging our students to do this as much as we used to. And I think that that's something we should get back to. So that's my number one, I would say. I think that we want to make sure we have really good open lines of communication and to be as non-judgmental as possible. Now, the reason this is such a difficult task is because we can think we're being super non-judgmental and our kids hear us as criticizing them or telling them what to do or being super judgmental. And so, some of that we just have to take because we're parents and that's what it is. But I think that sometimes when we give advice, it comes off as being judgmental. So I would again ask them first what they think before we launch into, you need to do this, because they don't always respond so well to that. I think then one of the other things, we gave them some expectations and we had these conversations over this summer. So we can check in now on how are they doing with the expectations we set? Like, are they going to class? Are they eating? Do they go to the dining hall? We may see that because we may see our DoorDash bill is, $500, but whatever that may be, not that I got that from anywhere. I think the other piece about that is I'm just we can talk about this more in the questions, but monitoring your kids, I think a lot of us have, Life 360 or these different ways that we monitor where our kids are. So we might know if our kids go to class or not. Do we need to and want to have all that information? I think that's certainly something for us to think about as parents, because what are we going to do with that information? Are we going to confront our kids that we know they didn't go to class today? Or are we going to be able to keep ourselves quiet about that? So maybe sometimes having all that information is actually not helpful to us. So I would say that's one other thing for us to think about when they're there. A couple other things I think we should always be asking about once they're already on campus. What are they doing outside of the academic piece? If they're a kid who's, studying a lot and everything else, are they going to club meetings? Are they getting involved in things? What are they doing? We want to know that they're doing things, they're meeting people, that kind of stuff. Can we encourage them to do more of those things? If our kid is not the most social of kids, many colleges have a board game club. Incidentally, the board game club always meets on Friday night. They know that these kids who need to go to the board game club don't have plans on Friday night. So there are ways to figure out how to get our kids to do things even when they're not the most socially involved. There's Hillel and Chabad, which do a lot of different things, not just services and social activities, but on many campuses, they have classes about Jewish identity. So if you feel like you're having trouble meeting people and you go to a Hillel meeting and it feels overwhelming, we can encourage them to go to a class where they don't have to be, it's not like a cocktail party, and they can still meet and connect with people. So what are they doing outside of academics? Are they sleeping? As I said, many kids don't sleep enough. And we know that attention, learning, academic performance, happiness, all of that is better if our kids are getting enough sleep. If they're stressed or overwhelmed, can we help them to set goals and priorities? Do they need more academic support? Should we get them to go see somebody at the school who can help them at that point? There are lots of resources, but if they don't access them, they're not helpful. Like the Writing Center's wonderful, but if you don't go, they can't help you to revise that paper. And then I think one of the most important things is after we've done all those things, we need to be the cheerleader and we need to celebrate the accomplishments that they do have. And even though things are not going to be perfect, there are many things that they're really resilient about and that they're doing great with. And we need to focus on those things because we, at the end of the day, want our kids to feel good about themselves.
That's phenomenal. And I couldn't agree more. And I want to just time check. We have about 15 minutes left. We want to get to some Q&A, but I'll ask one question right now, which is, what can we as parents do when the phone rings and our kid feels like there's a crisis going on, whether it's, oh my God, I'm failing a class. I didn't realize I was supposed to go on Fridays. I thought I was just supposed to go on Mondays and Wednesdays. I didn't realize this. I got in trouble. I got into a fight. My roommate, there's a million things that they could call in crisis mode. How should parents react when that phone rings?
So this is one of my favorite questions because how we should react and how we do react is often different. Even for those of us who are professional and who know how to do this, we don't always react the way we'd like to.
And by the way, I didn't give the heavy examples like I've been arrested, I'm in the hospital.
Right. I get those too. Yeah.
Right. Those happen as well. But it's but the regular sort of teenage crisis.
Right.
Phone rings, what do you do?
I think the first thing is we need to take a step back and we need to listen. Because a lot of times it's not as much of a crisis as we actually think it is, or it sounds like it is. And if we freak out right away, then they freak out more. And we have this, escalation of everything. So I think that the best thing to do is to step back and ask questions. What we want to teach our kids is that every problem is solvable. that there's nothing that's so bad that they need to give up or be hopeless or get so upset that we're not going to be able to help them. And so even if they are failing a class and need to drop that class, like it's not the end of the world. We want them to know that they can still, what if they need to come home? I mean, there are lots of things that we can still help them be successful, whatever the situation is. So the first thing is to take a step back and to ask them questions. Because once you've asked questions, you have a better sense of what the actual situation is, and then you can help them with that problem-solving piece. I give all of my patients, all of my kids who are seniors in high school, actually, I do this usually before they're going away to college, because it's helpful in high school as well, a little pearl on how to talk to their parents. I talked about setting expectations for kids. When you have something you have to tell your parents and you're afraid they're going to freak out, which often they do, how can you tell them something that you're really nervous about telling them? And so what I say is like, you need to set the expectations first. And so if you go in and you say, Mom, I have something really important to tell you, it's really serious, and I'm really like nervous about telling you this, and I don't know how I'm afraid you're gonna get so mad, and I don't even know what to do, but you always said I could come to you with anything and that you wouldn't get mad. And so I really want to tell you this. Then your parent immediately is like, oh my God, what happened? And we have these thoughts about it being some horrendous crisis. And usually it's not something that's that bad. And then we're like, oh, okay, we can deal with that. And it's like magical, because a lot of times you come in and you say something and the parent does get upset. And I know I've been there as well. So I think that we really want to step back. We want to listen, and we want to ask questions, and we want to not bring in early is my best advice on that.
Fantastic. Okay, Seth, we've been talking about it the entire the entire webinar. Let's talk for a minute about one of the things that parents can do to support their kids week in and week out while they're on college campuses, and that is the GapWell Guide. Can you please explain, because we've been mentioning it, we've mentioned videos and this and that, and can you please explain very clearly and succinctly, like, what is it?
So everything that Amy's been talking about is what we're focused on with the GapWell Guide. And Amy, there's so many things that you touched on, and we've spent hours in preparation for tonight. Natural consequences, a sense of community. There's so many things that are critically important. The challenge is, A, you're not seeing any patients because you're so busy. But the bigger challenge is we as parents want to tell our kids, hey, do this, do that. Listen, like that's not what they're looking for. And so when Lee and I launched the GapWell Guide, we talked about the survey we did this time last year. And we talked to a lot of students, and we made a bunch of assumptions as parents of high schoolers and college students. But what we found is that while we did a pretty good job guessing about what parents want and think, we were actually a little surprised about what the students had to say. The college students in their first year, reflecting on their first year. And Amy, that's when you first reached out to us because you started to learn about what we were doing. And you've been a great cheerleader and supporter. And I think what we're trying to do is the same thing that you're doing, but we're trying to do it knowing what the data tells us. And as one of our advisors told us, like the data doesn't lie. And so the data shows that the number one place that our teens want to go for advice is those wiser older students. I mean, that was the number one answer. 93% of the people that did our 1,000+ person survey said that's where they want to go for advice. So if that's their number one choice, in dead last, it was a tie between the university and social media. So at least our kids are smart enough to know that social media is not real life. Us parents, we came in second, but we were really, really, really distant second. So the GapWell Guide is based on the idea that older students, juniors, seniors, recent grads from lots of universities, Northwestern, Michigan, Indiana, NYU, Muhlenberg, Maryland. I picked the schools that they're actual BBYO alums who are working for us. These are awesome young adults who want to help people that were in their shoes. They were in their shoes a couple years ago. And it's the advice that they wish they knew. And they're happy to share it with a rising freshman, someone who's graduating from college. And we took exactly what they told us and we created a product around that. So it's short form video. Why? Because this generation doesn't do a whole lot of reading, right? So short form in the GapWell Guide world is 1.5 to 3 minutes. It's focused on practical advice that our teens can understand, apply to their day-to-day, and every video ends effectively with words of encouragement. And the reason I bring that up is that this is not social media. It's a subscription-based product. Social media is meant to sort of tear you down, the toxic comparison that we talked about. What we're really focused on is practical advice and words of encouragement. Since it comes out of the mouth of older students, they listen a lot more. They're vulnerable. They're honest. They're candid. It's great. From parent perspective, it's the same advice that we're giving, but it's coming out of the mouth of a 21-year-old, 22-year-old. And then the last thing I just wanted to say about this, we were testing this back in August to see what kind of advice, what kind of effectiveness that the advice was having in the very early days of our company. 95% of the students said the subscription was worthwhile. 95% said they would recommend this to their other freshmen at their college, and 95% said they implemented some of the learnings from the content on the guide. So if I can get my teen to implement 95% of the advice from wiser older students, I'd be quite happy.
And what I love about this, I'm not someone who normally recommends products and things like that, but I know Lee and Seth, and I was really excited that they were doing this. What I love about it is that I think that my experience is that a lot of freshmen don't know older students to ask. And so what do? They either have their RA if they feel comfortable, but they may not. But the other place is that they, and this is what I saw with my daughter, they go on these anonymous college apps and they're asking questions of other people at the school, but you have no idea who is responding. And so I know that there were some questionable things in some of those responses some of the time, both for my own daughter and some other patients that I've worked with. And I love the idea that you have these lovely, wonderful, well-adjusted, upperclassmen students who remember how hard their freshman year was, advising, almost like being like a little bit of peer guidance and peer mentorship for these younger students who are navigating a difficult transition. I think it's a great idea. So I really like it.
And thank you. And just to be clear, it's not one-on-one. Everything is vetted. Everything is the issues come out once a week. They're texted to the students so that they can go right in and every video that goes onto the platform has gone through a tremendous editorial review so that there's no bad advice. And it really is, as Seth said, the advice you wish your kid would get. But it's from people they'll actually listen to. So it's been phenomenally successful. And because of that, BBYO asked us to create a partnership and a discount for BBYO families. So Dara put the link back in the chat. It is literally the best pricing. It comes out to about $20 a month, which if your kid is going to college and you're having to write those giant tuition bills, a 10-month subscription to the GapWell guide and the pre-college crash course for what equates to roughly $20 a month is a bargain. And so we've done this discount. Go back to that BBYO landing page and you can click through and gift it to your child, to their friends.
And I would imagine that the students could then participate as upperclassmen once they're there, right? Like they
have that as well.
could,
Absolutely. All right. So we have about 7 minutes left. I want to get to some of the questions. The one question that I know has come in a bunch, which is, what do you do when your child calls you and says, "I'm unhappy"? We've mentioned this, right? "I'm anxious. I can't make friends. I'm unhappy. Maybe I came to the wrong school. I should have picked this one over that one. I made a huge mistake." How do we respond to that?
So when we were at the CVR BBYO convention last weekend in a room with 35 high school seniors, I remember I said, "Who's excited?" A whole bunch of hands went up. "Who's anxious?" A whole bunch of hands went up. And I told everyone in the room, I said, "Look, you're all going to have moments." I mean, the data we saw is 60 to 70% of students in their first year seriously think about, maybe I made a mistake. I'm not meant to be here. It has less to do with the school, more to do with the transition. That's totally normal. I think we have to, as parents, ask those open-ended questions and not get all worked up about it. But, it's normal to feel like this is not the right place for me. it's normal to feel like everyone else is making friends except for me. And so we really talk about how, let them talk to other students from BBYO. It could be their RA, it could be someone they know from their high school. Like, talk to all our students who are going to say, yeah, the same thing happened to me. And I know it feels terrible. And I know you feel like you need to move on. Like, just leverage, again, those older students that they can relate to. It doesn't have to be through the GapWell guy, but it's really important because us as parents, we want to make sure our kids are okay. We want to see our kids thrive. So I think it's really, when they say something, and they're going to, and I said that to the room in Stamford, Connecticut last week, and I said, half the people in this room are going to have moments where they're going to say, this is not meant for me. And I must have picked the wrong school. And, everyone else in social media is having awesome parties and great, like, that's just not real. So Amy, I mean, when we've had calls with you the last couple of weeks and people are calling you and having those conversations and you're patient.
Right. I mean, I think that the couple things I would say that are really important is that we have to sort of sort out when our kids say these things to us, what exactly is going on. Because, it may be that this is a more serious challenge or problem and we want to address it differently. And, all colleges these days, because this is beyond our scope, but we are in the middle of a youth mental health crisis in general. Every school has great counseling center services now. Even the schools that never had them before, I don't know of a school, now maybe there is one and maybe someone will tell me, but I don't know of a school that doesn't have at least some short-term support available. And so if your kid is really struggling, that's certainly a good place to start. But I think we have to ask them what's really going on, because it may be that they had a bad day. They don't want to tell you that they failed a test. They're having social difficulty. There may be other things we can advise. And so the range of possible responses and interventions, it runs the gamut. But I think we want to figure out, are they having difficulty, or is this just an up and down of a day? One of the things I often recommend, because parents sometimes get really nervous about, are we, is this a crisis? Is this a point where we should be bringing our kid home? If you're that worried, you don't necessarily have to bring your kid home. You can go visit, there are hotels near almost every single school, and you can go and you can just be there and just kind of try to get a sense the next day or two before you intervene in a big way, because sometimes, it will sound like it's the biggest crisis, and by tomorrow it feels a lot better.
Yeah.
We only have a couple minutes left. We've got a couple questions about extroverted kid parenting versus introverted. I have both, and I will say that it's a little bit different. So, and Amy, any advice for introverted versus? I know we added this as one of the questions. If you
out of the 35,
right? If you didn't download the conversations to have with your kid, one of them has a breakdown of if your kid's introverted versus extroverted. But why don't you just talk for a minute about that, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, so I think that it's, obviously kids have different motivations and different focuses, and so some kids, we have to really encourage them to get out and to meet other people. And some kids are out socializing and we don't know if they're going to class at all, let alone doing any of their work. And so I think both of those can make us anxious, right? Because we want our kids to do well and to succeed, and they have to go to class at least sometimes, or at least do their work in order to be able to stay there. So if they're happy socially and they're not going to class, they're not going to be able to stay there. And we want our kids not to just be doing their work. And so again, I think that it's sort of listening to them, what their experience has been so far, and encouraging them, especially if they're an introverted kid that is anxious about the socialization or anxious about meeting people. It's figuring out what are the things that they would feel comfortable going to. And there are always things that are going to feel less like they're big social requirements, but yet they're things they can do where they'll connect with some people. And then if they're having, I just want to mention also, if they're having trouble with the academic piece, there are so many different supports that you can get on campus in terms of help for, organization and executive functioning, help for, tutoring and different things. I mean, schools have a lot of different things available. And so there's usually a dean now in charge of like special accommodations. And so if your kid is struggling with any of those things, there are usually a lot of supports that they can find on campus.
And the last thing I was just going to add, especially from our perspective, is that it's not a one size fits all approach. You know, you might find an awesome older student who's really nurturing and sweet, and that really resonates with your son or daughter. And then you might find a really intense student athlete who's really about getting stuff done. It's all about, like Amy said, you need to find the options that are best suited for your son or daughter. And they need to learn to advocate for themselves because someone's not going to come to them and check on them. This is not, elementary school. This is college. This is, a step into adulthood.
It is, I know we're at time, so Erica, I'll pass it back to you, but I will say that one of the benefits of exposing them to lots of different ideas and lots of different voices is that it helps normalize all the things that they're going through. And that for most of what we've experienced in this business, in this journey of talking with a lot of college students, is that mostly what they want to hear is, oh, that's normal. That happens. You're going to feel that way. I felt that way. I failed my test. I got kicked out of my friend group. This happened to me. It's normal. You'll get through it. You can do this. It's those words. They carry so much weight coming from someone who looks like them, sounds like them. And oftentimes that little bit of sort of normalizing that this happens is all they need to pick themselves up and move forward with confidence. So with that, Erica, I want to thank everybody, by the way, for staying with us. It's as I said in the beginning, BBYO is near and dear to our heart, and we really are proud and thrilled that we can support the community in the way that we are.
Thank you all so much, Lee, Seth, and Amy. It was a really amazing conversation. It brought me back to some of my own scary moments of my freshman year and where I wish I would have had a resource like GapWell to support me, because I know I would have, as a BBYO alum, would have loved to have an older sibling in some capacity to kind of help me guide my way through. So I hope you all found that as interesting and engaging as I did. For those of you who came on late, a recording will be shared out later this week, in addition with the links with the BBYO discounts that Seth and Lee and Amy have so kindly shared. This is our last parent event of the year. We've had an amazing sessions throughout the year, and we really look forward to bringing back everybody together in the fall. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful evening, and have a very happy Passover. Thank you.